Welcome to The Awakening, Black Women United. I am your host, Sherry Donnie. Subscribe, like, share, comment, and hit the notification bell so you know every time I upload a new video. Let's talk about the BDE of Tucker Carlson to go to Russia and get the global interview of the year with Russian President Vladimir Putin. This interview is fire. I am not the biggest fan of Tucker Carlson, as our politics differ on many issues, but kudos to him for achieving this historic interview during devastating times on the planet. Putin had some very interesting things to say which affect the Black African world. Remember when the war first jumped off and there were tons of Africans not allowed out of Ukraine? Well, Putin speaks on the rise of neo-Nazism in Ukraine. Does Putin have agendas? Sure. Was there a lot of truth told? What impact does a media interview with a controversial figure have on global politics? To explore this, we delve into a recent interview between Tucker Carlson and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Carlson's interview with Putin arrives at a critical time, as U.S. support for Ukraine teeters on a precipice. The timing of the interview, coinciding with Congress's failure to provide Ukraine aid, presents Putin with an opportune platform. The Russian leader uses this to further undermine the probability of U.S. financial assistance to Ukraine. Carlson, known for his skepticism about Ukraine aid, has been accused of echoing Russian propaganda and misinformation about the country. This aligns him with the standpoint of former President Donald Trump and his supporters in Congress. In a calculated move, Putin tailors his propaganda to appeal to the Republican right, effectively addressing the GOP's supporters directly through the lens of Carlson's show. Criticism, however, has been swift and scathing. Former UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson lambasts Carlson for his lack of challenge to Putin on the invasion of Ukraine and for failing to raise questions about war crimes. Johnson denounces the interview as bum-sucking servility to a tyrant, equating it to an interview Adolf Hitler gave in 1940. Despite the backlash, the interview serves a dual purpose. It aids Putin's campaign to erode support for Ukraine among GOP voters, and simultaneously elevates Carlson's profile following his departure from Fox News. A significant revelation during the interview concerns American journalist Evan Gershkovich, currently detained in Moscow on espionage charges. Putin hints at the possibility of a deal for Gershkovich's release, suggesting it could come at the cost of freeing a Russian assassin serving a life sentence in Germany. Now let's hear some of the interview and you come to your conclusion. Has the U.S. and Western nations had the ability to stop this war and taken our tax dollars to fund it, while we America suffer under high inflation? Let's listen.
This means the prohibition of all kinds of neo-Nazi movements. This is one of the problems that we discussed during the negotiation process, which ended in Istanbul early this year. And it was not our initiative, because we were told by the Europeans, in particular, that it was necessary to create conditions for the final signing of the documents. My counterparts in France and Germany said, "How can you imagine them signing a treaty with a gun to their heads? The troops should be pulled back from Kiev." I said, "All right." We withdrew the troops from Kiev. As soon as we pulled back our troops from Kiev, our Ukrainian negotiators immediately threw all our agreements reached in Istanbul into the bin and got prepared for a long-standing armed confrontation with the help of the United States and its satellites in Europe. That is how the situation has developed, and that is how it looks now.
But what is, pardon my ignorance, what is denazification? What would that mean? What is...
Да, вот я как раз хочу сейчас об этом сказать. Это очень важный вопрос. Денацификация.
That is what I want to talk about right now. It is a very important issue. Denazification. After gaining independence, Ukraine began to search, as some Western analysts say, its identity. And it came up with nothing better than to build this identity upon some false heroes who collaborated with Hitler.
Я уже говорил, что
I have already said that in the early 19th century, when the theorists of independence and sovereignty of Ukraine appeared, they assumed that an independent Ukraine should have very good relations with Russia.
но в силу исторического развития
But due to the historical development, those territories were part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Poland, where Ukrainians were persecuted and treated quite brutally as well as were subject to cruel behavior.
идентичность и вели себя очень жестоко, это все осталось в памяти.
There were also attempts to destroy their identity.
Когда началась Вторая мировая война, часть этой
All this remained in the memory of the people. When World War II broke out, part of this extremely nationalist elite collaborated with Hitler, believing that he would bring them freedom.
она начала сотрудничать с Гитлером, полагая, что
The German troops, even the SS troops, made Hitler's collaborators do the dirtiest work of exterminating the Polish and Jewish population. Hence this brutal massacre of the Polish and Jewish population, as well as the Russian population too.
коллаборационистам, которые с Гитлером сотрудничали. Вот отсюда вот эта жестокая резня.
This was led by the persons who are well known, Bandera, Shukevich. It was those people who were made national heroes. That is the problem. And we are constantly told that nationalism and neo-Nazism exist in other countries as well. Yes, they are seedlings, but we uproot them, and other countries fight against them. But Ukraine is not the case. These people have been made into national heroes in Ukraine. Monuments to those people have been erected. They are displayed on flags. Their names are shouted by crowds that walk with torches, as it was in Nazi Germany.
Возводят. Они на флагах, они их имена кричат.
These were people who exterminated Poles, Jews, and Russians.
Это люди, которые уничтожали поляков, евреев и русских. Надо.
It is necessary to stop this practice and prevent the dissemination of this concept. I say that Ukrainians are part of the one Russian people. They say, no, we are a separate people. Okay, fine. If they consider themselves a separate people, they have the right to do so, but not on the basis of Nazism, the Nazi ideology.
Would you be satisfied with the territory that you have now?
Нет, сейчас закончим. Вы же задали вопрос по неонацизму и денацификации.
I will finish answering the question. You just asked a question about neo-Nazism and denazification.
Замалчивается на Западе.
Look, the president of Ukraine visited Canada. The story is well known, but being silenced in the Western countries.
Спикер парламента.
The Canadian Parliament introduced a man who, as the Speaker of the Parliament said, fought against the Russians during the World War II. Well, who fought against the Russians during the World War II?
Выяснилось, что это
Hitler and his accomplices.
он лично.
It turned out that this man served in the SS troops. He personally killed Russians, Poles, and Jews.
Они занимались.
The SS troops consisted of Ukrainian nationalists who did this dirty work. The president of Ukraine stood up with the entire Parliament of Canada and applauded this man.
Рукоплескал этому человеку.
How can this be imagined?
Как это
The
может
president of Ukraine himself, by the way, is a Jew by nationality.
еврей по
Really, my question is, what do you do about it? I mean, Hitler's been dead for 80 years. Nazi Germany no longer exists. And so, true. And so, I think what you're saying is you want to extinguish or at least control Ukrainian nationalism. But how? How do you do that?
Вот послушайте меня. Ваш вопрос очень тонкий.
Listen to me. Your question is very
Можно я
subtle,
скажу, как я думаю?
and I can tell you what I think. Do not take offense.
Of course.
Он, казалось бы, тонкий, он очень противный, этот вопрос.
This question appears to be subtle. It is quite pesky.
Значит,
You say Hitler has been dead for so many years,
люди, которые
80 years.
уничтожали
But his
евреев,
example
русских и
lives on.
поляков, живы.
People who exterminated Jews, Russians, and Poles are alive.
Сегодняшней Украины
And the
аплодирует
president,
ему
the
в
current
канадском
president of
парламенте,
today's Ukraine,
аплодирует
applauds him
стоя.
in the Canadian Parliament. gives a standing ovation. Can we say that we have completely uprooted this ideology if what we see is happening today? That is what denazification is in our understanding. We have to get rid of those people who maintain this concept and support this practice and try to preserve it. That is what denazification is. That is what we mean.
Right. My question was a little more specific. It was, of course, not a defense of Nazis, neo or otherwise. It was a practical question. You don't control the entire country. You don't control Kiev. You don't seem like you want to. So how do you eliminate a culture or an ideology or feelings or a view of history in a country that you don't control? What do you do about that?
А вот знаете, как вам не покажется странным, в ходе переговоров в Стамбуле...
You know, as strange as it may seem to you, during the negotiations in Istanbul, we did agree that we have it all in writing. Neo-Nazism would not be cultivated in Ukraine, including that it would be prohibited at the legislative level. Mr. Carlson, we agreed on that. This, it turns out, can be done during the negotiation process. And there's nothing humiliating for Ukraine as a modern civilized state. Is any state allowed to promote Nazism? It is not, is it? That is it.
Will there be talks, and why haven't there been talks about resolving the conflict in Ukraine, peace talks?
Они были, они дошли до очень высокой стадии согласования позиций, сложно.
They have been. They reached a very high stage of coordination of positions in a complex process, but still they were almost finalized. But after we withdrew our troops from Kiev, as I have already said, the other side threw away all these agreements and obeyed the instructions of Western countries, European countries, and the United States to fight Russia to the bitter end. Moreover, the President of Ukraine has legislated a ban on negotiating with Russia. He signed a decree forbidding everyone to negotiate with Russia. And then we can agree on some terms. Before you do that, stop. What's easier? Why would I call him? What should I talk to him about? Or beg him for what?
And what messages do you get back?
You're going to deliver such and such weapons to Ukraine? Oh, I'm afraid, please don't. What is there to talk about?
Do you think NATO is worried about this becoming a global war or a nuclear conflict?
At least that's what they're talking about. And they're trying to intimidate their own population with an imaginary Russian threat. This is an obvious fact. And thinking people, not Philistines, but thinking people, analysts, those who are engaged in real politics, just smart people, understand perfectly well that this is a fake. They're trying to fuel the Russian threat.
The threat I think you're referring to is a Russian invasion of Poland, Latvia, expansionist behavior. Can you imagine a scenario where you sent Russian troops to Poland? But you're describing two different systems. You say the leader acts in the interest of the voters, but you also say these decisions are not made by the leader, they're made by the ruling classes. You've run this country for so long, you've known all these American presidents. What are those power centers in the United States, do you think? Like, who actually makes the decisions?
Я не знаю. Это Америка сложная страна, такая очень, с одной стороны, консервативная.
I don't know. America is a complex country, conservative on one hand, rapidly changing on the other. It's not easy for us to sort it all out. Who makes decisions in the elections? Is it possible to understand this when each state has its own legislation? Each state regulates itself? Someone can be excluded from elections at the state level. It is a two-stage electoral system. It is very difficult for us to understand it. Certainly, there are two parties that are dominant, the Republicans and the Democrats. And within this party system, the centers that make decisions, that prepare decisions.
Потом смотрите,
Then, look, why, in my opinion, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, such an erroneous, crude, completely unjustified policy of pressure was pursued against Russia? After all, this is a policy of pressure. NATO expansion, support for the separatists in Caucasus, creation of a missile defense system. These are all elements of pressure. Pressure, pressure, pressure. Then, dragging Ukraine into NATO is all about pressure, pressure, pressure. Why? I think,
ну, Маска, я думаю, что Маска остановить
well,
невозможно.
I think there's no stopping Elon Musk. He will do as he sees fit.
Надо искать
Nevertheless,
способы.
you need to find some common ground with him, search for ways to persuade him. I think he's a smart person, I truly believe he is. So you need to reach an agreement with him because this process needs to be formalized and subjected to certain rules.
Того, что будет происходить с ним в связи с развитием вот этих новейших исследований и технологий. в генетике, либо
Humanity has to consider what is going to happen due to the newest development in genetics
Поэтому
or in AI.
вот
One
тогда,
can make
когда
an approximate
человечество
prediction of what will
почувствовало
happen.
угрозу своему существованию от ядерного оружия, все начали обладатели ядерного
Once
оружия начали
mankind
между собой
felt an
договариваться.
existential
Потому
threat
что
coming
понимали,
from
что
nuclear
их
weapons,
неаккуратное применение
all
может
nuclear
привести
nations began to
к
come to
полному
terms with one another
уничтожению.
since
Когда
they realized
наступит
the
понимание того,
negligent
что
use of nuclear weaponry could
беспредельное,
drive
бесконтрольное
humanity to
развитие
extinction.
искусственного интеллекта, либо генетики, либо еще каких-то современных направлений, остановить которые невозможно.
It is
Всё равно
impossible to
если
stop
не будет,
research in genetics or AI today, just as it was impossible to stop the use of gunpowder back in the day.
Эти исследования все равно будут. Но когда человечество почувствует угрозу для себя,
But as soon as we realize that the threat comes from unbridled and uncontrolled development of AI, or genetics, or any other field, the time will come to reach an international agreement on how to regulate these things.
I appreciate all the time you've given us. I just got to ask you one last question, and that's about someone who's very famous in the United States, probably not here, Evan Gershkovich, who's the Wall Street Journal reporter. He's 32, and he's been in prison for almost a year. This is a huge story in the United States, and I just want to ask you directly, without getting into the details of it or your version of what happened, if as a sign of your decency, you would be willing to release him to us and we'll bring him back to the United States.
мы столько сделали жестов доброй воли, что, мне кажется, мы исчерпали все лимиты.
We have done so many gestures of goodwill out of decency that I think we have run out of them.
Ни разу не ответил. Но
We have never seen anyone reciprocate to us in a similar manner.
что мы
However, in theory, we can say that we do not rule out that we can do
не
that
исключаем того, что мы можем это
if our
сделать
partners
при
take reciprocal steps.
встречном движении со стороны наших
When I talk about the partners, I first of all refer to special services.
представителей специальных служб.
Special services are in contact with one another. They are talking about the matter in question.
На то, чтобы не решить это.
There is no taboo to settle this
Мы
issue.
готовы ее решать.
We are willing to solve
Там
it.
есть определенные условия, которые
But there are certain terms being discussed via special services
по
channels.
партнерским каналам между спецслужбами.
I believe an agreement can be reached.
Да.
So typically, I mean, this stuff has happened for obviously centuries. One country catches another spy within its borders, it trades it for one of its own intel guys in another country. I think what makes, and it's not my business, but what makes this different is the guy's obviously not a spy, he's a kid. And maybe he was breaking your law in some way, but he's not a super spy, and everybody knows that. And he's being held hostage in exchange, which is true. With respect, it's true, and everyone knows it's true. So maybe he's in a different category. Maybe it's not fair to ask for, somebody else in exchange for letting him out. Maybe it degrades Russia to do that.
Вы знаете, можно как угодно говорить, что такое шпион, что не шпион.
You know, you can give different interpretations to what constitutes a spy, but there are certain things provided by law. If person gets secret information and does that in conspiratorial manner, then this is qualified as espionage. And that is exactly what he was doing. He was receiving classified, confidential information, and he did it covertly. Maybe he did that out of carelessness or his own initiative. Considering the sheer fact, this is qualified as espionage. The fact has been proven, as he was caught red-handed when he was receiving this information. If it had been some far-fetched excuse, some fabrication, something not proven, it would have been a different story then. But he was caught red-handed when he was secretly getting confidential information. What is it then?
But are you suggesting that he was working for the US government or NATO, or he was just a reporter who was given material he wasn't supposed to have? Those seem like very different things.
Я не знаю, на кого он работал. Но повторяю еще.
I don't know who he was working for, but I would like to reiterate that getting classified information in secret is called espionage, and he was working for the US Special Services, some other agencies. I don't think he was working for Monaco, as Monaco is hardly interested in getting that information. It is up to everything has to be done in calm manner.
I wonder if that's true with the war, though. Also, I mean, I guess I want to ask one more question, which is, and maybe you don't want to say so for strategic reasons, but are you worried that what's happening in Ukraine could lead to something much larger and much more horrible? And how motivated are you just to call the U.S. government and say, let's come to terms?
Послушайте, я же сказал.
I already said that we did not refuse to talk. We are willing to negotiate. It is the Western side, and Ukraine is obviously a satellite state of the US. It is evident. I do not want you to take it as if I'm looking for a strong word or an insult, but we both understand what is happening. The financial support, 72 billion US dollars, was provided. Germany ranks second, then other European countries come. Dozens of billions of US dollars are going to Ukraine. There's a huge influx of weapons. In this case, you should tell the current Ukrainian leadership to stop and come to a negotiating table, rescind this absurd decree. We did not refuse.
Sure, but you already said it. I didn't think you meant it as an insult, because you already said correctly, it's been reported that Ukraine was prevented from negotiating a peace settlement by the former British Prime Minister acting on behalf of the Biden administration. So of course they're a satellite. Big countries control small countries. That's not new. And that's why I asked about dealing directly with the Biden administration, which is making these decisions, not President Zelensky of Ukraine.
Но если администрация Зеленского на Украине отказалась от переговоров,
well, if the Zelensky administration in Ukraine refused to negotiate, I assume they did it under the instruction from Washington. If Washington believes it to be the wrong decision, let it abandon it. Let it find a delicate excuse so that no one is insulted. Let it come up with a way out. It was not us who made this decision, it was them. So let them go back on it. That is it. However, they made the wrong decision, and now we have to look for a way out of the situation to correct their mistakes. They did it, so let them correct it themselves. We support this.
This has been The Awakening. Black Women United. I am your host, Sherry Dani. Subscribe, like, share, comment, and hit the notification bell so you know every time I upload a new video. The Carlson-Putin interview is a strategic tool for Putin to sway political opinions, particularly among GOP supporters. The interview also highlights the ongoing issue of Gershkovich's detention and the potential for a controversial prisoner swap. Despite criticism, the interview undeniably boosts Carlson's profile, proving once again the power of media in shaping global politics.